Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Damon Wilson. I'm President and CEO of the National Endowment for Democracy. I want to welcome all of our guests who are here in person. Welcome to the Endowment, and all of those who are joining on the live stream today for what is a very special conversation. We're honored to welcome our distinguished guests. Sikyong Pempasering, welcome the President of the Central Tibetan Administration. It is a privilege to host you on your first visit to Washington since being elected last April, inaugurated and sworn in last May. Ned had the opportunity to host the Sikyong virtually last June, but now we are really pleased to be able to do this appropriately in person. So welcome. Sikyong Tsering, you and the people of Tibet, you know the endowment well. We are longtime friends and champions of the Tibetan people. We respect your commitment to democracy and freedom, and we're looking forward to hearing from you today on this conversation. We're joined to hear the Sikyong's thoughts on the approach, the strategy for the Tibetan democracy movement. And I want to encourage all of those in the audience, those online, to join the conversation at Ned Democracy and using the hashtag NedEvents. Sikyong Tsering has been committed to the Tibetan freedom struggle for his entire career. He was elected as a member of the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile and subsequently Speaker of Parliament. He was then appointed as His Holiness the Dalai Lama's representative to North America in 2016, based here in Washington. And last year, he became the democratically elected leader of the Tibetan people and the political successor to His Holiness the Dalai Lama of Tibet. Tibet has long enjoyed strong bipartisan support in Congress just down Pennsylvania Avenue. And it's seen most recently in the legislation, the landmark legislation, the Tibetan Policy and Support Act. The Tibetan freedom struggle stands as a moral exemplar. Led by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the Tibetan cause has consistently been associated with the values of justice, compassion, and nonviolence. But it also represents the principle of democracy. And His Holiness, as we were just discussing, His Holiness first started the political reforms in Tibet before he was forced into exile in 1959. Once in exile, he immediately implemented significant democratic reforms. And today, Sikyong Tsering leads an administration that is a model of a thriving democracy in exile, with three pillars of democracy guided by a democratic constitution, carrying out free and fair elections. The Tibetan exile government is a remarkable achievement, especially considering the challenges, the odds that it faces. Indeed, it can serve as a model for other exile democracy movements. The endowment itself is honored to have a long history with Tibet. A highlight of our relationship has been hosting His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 2010 and 2016, and awarding him as well, His Holiness, our Democracy Service Medal. It's highest honor to recognize the outstanding efforts to advance the cause of human rights and democracy around the world. And in many ways, the 6-decade-long struggle of the Tibetan people, it represents the fight between totalitarianism and democracy, oppression and freedom, struggles that we are seeing played out too painfully today. We support your efforts to shine a spotlight on Beijing's efforts to undermine Tibetan Buddhism, language, cultural traditions, its history of independence. And against the backdrop of China's rollback of freedoms in Hong Kong, repression across the mainland, its assault on the Uyghur identity, and increasingly its export of authoritarian tactics and technologies to autocrats around the world. It's in moments like this that we must unite around what is right, what is just, and have unwavering moral clarity, and that's what your leadership provides. Ned is proud to be one of the Tibetan movement's most steadfast allies. That tradition will continue. Our support for Tibet spans over 3 decades, and we will remain as committed as ever. We stand side by side with the Tibetan people, our Tibetan partners, and their struggle for freedom. And we're supporting the Tibetan democracy movement through helping with human rights advocacy, supporting international support for Tibetan freedom, and backing a strong exile community rooted firmly in democratic norms and values to serve as a guiding principle for the Tibet movement. The Sikyong and I, we first met virtually in the first weeks as I joined the endowment as president. In fact, I told him he was one of the first people I heard from congratulating me on my appointment. Thank you, sir. And again, we've now just had a meeting with our teams, a very productive meeting just before this event. The Sikyong Pimpasering, we are delighted to welcome you to Washington, to welcome you back to the endowment. We look forward to working closely with you. I look forward to visiting you in Dharamsala as we continue to support the Tibetan people and their struggle for freedom. So with that, let me invite you to the stage for your remarks, after which we'll invite our Vice President for Programs, Brian Joseph, to moderate a conversation with you. Welcome to the endowment, sir.
Good evening. Damon, thank you very much for the introductory speech. I was told that you are a very good speaker, a motivator. And certainly you proved that right now. Just before I took over the mantle or stewardship of Sikyong, Carl and Pamela, we had a conversation before Damon took over. And then just after I took over the role of the Sikyong, Damon was very much in the office, and Carl had done a lot of work over more than 3 decades. And now Damon is here, and we look forward to his leadership at NED to promote democracy, human rights in countries that are affected by authoritarian regimes, and also countries that lack democracy. So in the case of Tibetans, NED's relationship with Tibetans goes a long way back, including Carl's relationship with Lodi Gyari, who is also no more with us, and the successive Tibetan leadership in Dharamsala. So now that I'm here, I also want to point out that I had several opportunities to be present in NED events here, including the 2010 visit of His Holiness at NED, and the role that NED played, not just with the Central Tibetan administration, but also with the civil society within the community, has been very contributing in strengthening democracy in our exile community. And it's not just because of the vision of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to democratize the Tibetan polity. Because if you go back in time, His Holiness visited China in 1954-55 and saw how communism functioned. And he was there for almost 1 year or less than a year in China and had many conversations with Mao Zedong and Tao Enlai and others. And His Holiness even now says that even at that time, even though it seemed very disciplined, people had no right to speak their mind. And when His Holiness came to India in 1956-57, then he found that he visited Indian Parliament. And even though it was very chaotic, he found that everybody had the freedom to speak their mind. And when we came into exile, not even 1 year after coming into exile, His Holiness introduced democracy way back in 1960. And we still thrive. Therefore, in the last 60, 70 years, we did achieve quite well. But when I took over, we had a crisis. So the first moment was after I took oath of office, the parliament could not take, or there was a problem in a group of parliamentarians taking oath differently. So it took about 4 months. At that time, people asked me, how will this issue be, or the crisis be resolved? I said, we are all Buddhist, and nothing is constant. And in the West also, they say, change is the only constant. So I was not worried, because it's a matter of time that better sense should prevail on the people who are elected by the people to do good for the people. So it should not be an impediment in the progress of democracy. But we have now overcome that, and now we have a vibrant democracy. People who watch our democratic process, including parliamentary proceedings, can be very proud that we have diversity of voices in the House. Irrespective of different opinions, we are all committed to the same cause. That's why we remain united. For people outside, they might feel that there are a lot of division within the community. There is some, to some level, but more of that divisiveness is caused by China's interference within our community in terms of spreading disinformation and other things. So these are challenges that we need to face. And I think with these few words, I will sit with Brian to talk more in detail about some of the questions that Brian will grill me. We know Brian and we go a long way. So thank you, Brian, for moderating the session, and Damon for providing us the opportunity for this occasion. Thank you very much.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Pempa, it's a real pleasure to have you here. Pempa's right, he and I go way back. I first met him when he was an NGO leader, the Tibetan Parliamentary Research Center in New Delhi in the 90s. And then I've had the real pleasure and honor of knowing him all of these years, and now to welcome you to the NED as Mr. President. Let me start by asking you a little bit about what you think the unraveling of freedom in Hong Kong means for Tibet. How does it challenge your approach to foreign policy? What does it mean for you about how you see and think about Beijing's foreign policy and treatment of its own populations?
Some years back, before I left Washington, D.C., I met a Chinese scholar who told me that Xi Jinping's idea is to consolidate all power. And that has proved true over the years, in the last 4 or 5 years since I heard that statement. And it reflected in the way how Xi Jinping reacted to the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, and how they introduced the security law, and how the Hong Kong people suffered because of this, with total disregard to international agreements. So for China, international laws and international agreements are accepted by them if it is in their favor, and if it is not in their favor, they don't care about international law. That's why I keep saying, if there is anyone who abides by international law today with a lot of skepticism, including what's happening today in Ukraine and the reaction of the international community and from the people who are in the Security Council doing what they're doing to countries who are smaller. So in Tibet, as we say, as we reflect on the issue since Ukraine came up, I want to say that we are with the people of Ukraine. And when things were happening there, it reminded us of China's invasion of Tibet in 1950. And one of my good friends, Mr. Gyaltsang Gyatso in Zurich, he called me one day and said, "We Tibetans must be one of the community who pray the most, but we also are the most unfortunate ones. With every time there is something happening to Tibet and some focus on China." And I said, "Are you talking about since 1950s, when Tibet was invaded by China, and then the Korean War was going on? Now that you have a strong US-China trade war and a lot of focus on China's misbehavior, and then Ukraine comes up." But it's very sad. I mean, I think every time I go home and watch the news, I feel like, why can't we all civilians go to Ukraine and see whether Russia will have the guts to fire at all of us, kill all of us? Maybe that'll put an end to the war. So coming back to the question, right now, with the way Xi Jinping is heading, not just in Hong Kong, but also in Uyghur at the industrial scale of what happened there, and the test by the party secretary in Uyghur right now. So I deliberately use the word Uyghur, because when you would use the word Xinjiang, that is the name given by China to Uyghur people, and you are legitimizing China's words. So I try to refrain as much as possible. Even the Inner Mongolians, they like to be called as Southern Mongolians, not Inner Mongolians. And China tried to use Xizang for Tibet. They tried for 2-3 weeks. It didn't work because nobody knew what Xizang was, or is. So it looks very bleak. Just few minutes, just an hour ago, we were having discussion with another group, and there also the pessimism is very much there that till March next year, nothing is going to happen till Xi Jinping gets his third term. So it's quite bleak, but we cannot lose our hope. Once we lose our hope, then our struggle is also gone. So we'll keep the positive side of the events, but there is something a lot more to watch out for in the next 3-4 months post-Ukraine situation as to what will happen to Russia and how will China unravel its policies regarding this, and how will the international community look at China post-Ukraine and in the new global order that might emerge. So right now, we are not very hopeful, but we have to keep persisting.
Great. Let me ask you the sort of flip side of that. For the last, for a long period of time, people sort of looked to China as a modernizing, potentially liberalizing state. The more it was engaged with international commerce, that there was an expectation that it may moderate its behavior. That attitude towards China has seen a sea change, at least in Washington. There's a growing consensus that China poses a threat on a whole range of fronts. Does how the United States perceives China, Democrats, Republicans, a much broader coalition than you could have imagined a few years ago, how does that change in political orientation in Washington towards Beijing? What opportunities does it provide you? Does it change how you guys think of your political engagement in Washington, what you hope the various communities represented here could do to sort of support the Tibet movement?
Unfortunately, the world community did not listen to us. In the last 50, 60 years, we have been talking about the motivation of China. And if you read Kissinger on China, whenever China is falling, US was the one to support it. And so you can't blame China alone. US and the Western world is also responsible for making China what it is today, not in the sense of their attitude, but in developing China to the level that China is here today. But we are now a little bit relieved that our position is vindicated by the fact that US is one of the early ones to wake up to the reality of China's intentions and motivations. And now Europe is just now waking up to this. So this is a huge shift in policies. And within China, of course, their ambitions throughout the consecutive presidents of China, their objectives remain the same, but at different times, their attitudes may be a little different, posturing a little bit of liberalism or understanding with international community. But right now, under Xi Jinping, that has become something that we cannot trust China. And the reaction from the US government, I think right now we feel it's on the right track. And Europeans also, just before coming here, I met some Europeans on the way. And the feedback that we get is also the realization that right now, Russia is being belligerent, but the ultimate challenge is China. And then that realization is very much there in the world community. And during our meetings yesterday and today, people are looking at resetting the balance, and it's a positive feeling. So while feeling vindicated, but now we have to look at new ways and means to make China accountable, and that's the only way to move forward.
Great. Yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, was the Panchen Lama's birthday. Can you say a little bit about what you know of his conditions, his status, what efforts are afoot to raise attention, draw a profile to it? Just sort of fill us in a little bit on the Panchen Lama and your efforts to address his incarceration.
Unfortunately, none of us knows, including Tibetans, where Panchen Lama, Khyentse Nyima, the one recognized by His Holiness, is. We don't even know whether he is alive or not. So it's very difficult to comment. Even while celebrating his birthday, we don't know whether he is alive or not. And all of us know when he was at the age of 5 in the Western sense and 6 in the Tibetan numbers, since his abduction, we don't know, and everyone knows that it's a political decision. And Chinese government, who does not believe in the theory of reincarnation in the first place, wants to be responsible for reincarnation of lamas or living Buddhas, as they say. And this tradition of Panchen Lamas recognizing the Dalai Lamas, or the Dalai Lamas recognizing the Panchen Lamas, not from the first Dalai Lama and the first Panchen Lama, but in Chinese intrusion in 1793 about the golden urn, and all those add up to the belief that, Chinese belief that Panchen Lama, if they have the Panchen Lama under their fold, then there will be nobody to dispute the selection of the Dalai Lama in future. That is the only political motive. But in the last few days, when I think more about this, I think Chinese made a very big mistake. Way back in 1995, if they had recognized the same Khyentse Nyima as the Panchen Lama, it's the same Khyentse Nyima recognized by the Dalai Lama, still under their control, and then they might have more legitimacy to talk about the recognition of the next Dalai Lama, which is not happening now. So China will have to re-strategize, and I think they are more concerned about reincarnation than the Tibetans. So they passed this 2007 laws on living Buddhas, recognition of living Buddhas. That's why His Holiness always says in jest that if Communist China is really interested about reincarnation, they should look for Mao Zedong's reincarnation first, then Deng Xiaoping's reincarnation second, and then maybe the Dalai Lamas. So for that also, they'll have to learn Buddhism, they'll have to practice Buddhism, they'll have to believe in reincarnation, and that's a tall order for the Chinese to do. So they don't have the legitimacy, everybody knows. And when it comes to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, His Holiness has made it very clear since 1969 that His Holiness reincarnation, whether there should be a reincarnation of His Holiness or not, will be decided by the Tibetans. And as I was discussing with other groups also, now the legacy of His Holiness extends much beyond Tibetans. So you have the Mongolians, because Mongolians and Kalmykians and Tuas and Buryats are always complaining to us as to, will we not be a stakeholder in the selection of the next Dalai Lama? Because we are also followers of the Dalai Lama. So then you have the people in the Himalayan region and so many new followers of His Holiness all around the world. So these are two closely linked, the Panchen Lama's abduction and China's manipulation, or China's intention to use their own selection of the Panchen Lama to identify the next Dalai Lama. But that's not going to work. But I also keep saying this, and some dispute me, that let's see whether the Dalai Lama outlives the Communist Party or the Communist Party outlives the Dalai Lama.
Right. If you don't mind, can we switch? I want to ask you a little bit about sort of the Tibetan diaspora community in your administration. Over the last few years, more and more Tibetans have sought refuge in third countries outside of India. As we talked about earlier, there's sort of fewer and fewer Tibetans sort of leaving Tibet and finding refuge in Nepal and India. Tell us a little bit about how are you looking to engage sort of the increasingly large Tibetan diaspora around the world take advantage of their skills, their education, their connections in their host countries, including the United States?
And there are many challenges for the Tibetan community in diaspora. And one of the challenge is, of course, the changing demographic and the social system, social and demographic changes that are happening, as you mentioned, of Tibetans moving out of India, Nepal, and Bhutan into Western countries. I'm afraid I will not be able to tell you the exact number of Tibetans in the diaspora community, maybe in a few months to come. Once we finish the demography, we should be in a better position to tell you exactly how many. But right now, we estimate the diaspora community to be about 130,000. And out of that, about 45% have moved out of India and Nepal, mostly, and less so from Bhutan. But we try to turn every challenge into an opportunity. Just as after I took over, we had no parliament, but that we kept on moving with our administrative work. And in the last 10 months also, when we had the challenges of COVID, we turned that into an opportunity to restructure our administration and make it rationalize the whole civil service structure, make amendments to rules, those kind of things. So that put us right now on the right track to, now we are in a way finished with the administration and then move ahead with political work. And we turned that challenge into opportunity. Now, same case with Tibetans moving out. Now Tibetans are located in more than 20 different countries. And we have a large growing number of youth, many of whom are born in foreign countries. And, but at the same time, now they have become citizens of countries they live in, they understand the system, and they also speak the languages in the countries that they live in. And the International Campaign for Tibet has taken this initiative to use this as a tool to garner support, lobby support for Tibet. And this is what we intend to do on a larger scale. That's why we launched this program called Voluntary Tibet Advocacy Group, WeTAC, to seek engagement of mainly the younger generation of Tibetans in different countries to volunteer their time to advocate for Tibet and develop organic leadership within the young leadership. So make it more inclusive, get the whole Tibetan community going on an institutional level as well as individual level to carry the Tibet movement forward. So those challenges are very much there. We cannot wish it away, but we have to learn to turn those challenges into opportunities, which we are doing right now.
Great. Let me ask one more question, then we'll turn the floor over to the audience if anyone has questions, and then you can obviously answer their questions. The other question I wanted to ask you a little bit of, the Tibet movement has had long support on American college campuses, European college campuses. There's a broad movement that has been really supportive of the Tibet movement, the Tibet support groups and everything else. Tell us a little bit about how your administration will look to engage the broad activist communities around the world who've always been a key part of sort of the broader Tibet movement.
In the last 1 or 2 decades, there have been a little retraction or lessening of the local people in support of Tibet. At one time, as you mentioned, in the mid-90s, the level of support for Tibet in the general population in many countries were at its zenith, when there was musicians, there were politicians, there were ordinary people, there were people who were involved in different kind of things getting together. And today in the United States, you see Giovanni here, who has a Tibet support group in San Francisco. At one time, we used to have so many friends of Tibet around America, and now that has come down. Now we have to have a relook at those things because the number of Tibetans are increasing, but the involvement of the local population is decreasing. So maybe we lack in some way to reach out to the local population to seek their support and put pressure on the elected political leaders, which is what makes sense to reach out to the local population. Even when I was the representative here way back in 2017, we thought of reviving all these Friends of Tibet. Now that we have more hands, more minds, we certainly have the capacity to increase that to a level that we want it to be. This effort has to restart again. But our political engagement or dialogue with different groups has increased, and there are also different perceptions as to how we organize ourselves, because within the Tibetan community also, people think that only when you go on the streets and protest, that is some work that you do for Tibet. But because of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, because of our host countries who supported us through providing education for our children, now our people are educated enough to be engaged at different levels of advocacy, not just going on the streets. Just going on the street has become one of those many works that Tibetans can do. And we will definitely be making more efforts at reaching out to the local population. And International Campaign for Tibet is a perfect example. And today you have Tenzin Geshe-la also, who was one of the founder of the International Campaign for Tibet, and then the leaders at the helm of International Campaign for Tibet present here also, because perfect example is the membership for supporting the Tibetan cause, which sustains that institution as well as the movement. So many organizations that are dependent on individuals or one-time grants doesn't last that long. So to sustain the organizations, to sustain the institutions. So today, International Campaign for Tibet remains the largest Tibet support group with its branches in Amsterdam, in Brussels, and also in Germany. And there are more requests for International Campaign for Tibet to work with other Tibet supporters all around the world. And I think the International Campaign for Tibet here in the United States has played a very important role in setting an example for Tibet supporters to continue with the work that they do, and find more sustainable ways of supporting the institution that you set up. Otherwise, in a period of time, then the interest goes down, and then people are not able to support themselves, and the organization also dies down. So before I hand it back to you, I want to recognize the presence of Sigyep Rinpoche, who is here. He is the abbot of Tashilhunpo Monastery, and we aligned our program together to be here in Washington, D.C. on the 25th of April. That marks the 33rd birth anniversary of Panchen Rinpoche, and Rinpoche is one of the youngest abbot. He's only 38 and he's already an abbot of a monastery. That shows for his scholarship, and once he took over the Tashilhunpo Monastery, now Tashilhunpo is shaking up, and he's leading that movement. And he was telling me, Rinpoche was telling me that they used to organize Panchen Rinpoche's birthday at Tashilhunpo, which is the traditional seat of the Panchen Lamas, now in exile, based in South India, at the same place where I was born. So Rinpoche is here in DC to speak about Panchen Rinpoche. He also met with many leaders, and I think the focus this time is much more with statements coming from the State Department, statements coming from the Undersecretary, and statements coming from various other important stakeholders in this. So we are very happy that we could work with Sigyep Rinpoche on creating more awareness and understanding on the status of Panchen Rinpoche, and for the eventual release and to restore Panchen Rinpoche's leadership to Panchen Rinpoche, the real Panchen Rinpoche, not the one picked up by the Chinese government.
Great. Welcome. It's our honor to have you. All right. So If you have a question, please raise your hand and identify yourself, and we'll try to get through a number of questions in the next 15 or 20 minutes. Don't be shy, he's the president. Okay.
My name is Johnny.
Wait, we have a microphone.
Yeah.
My name is Johnny Yang or Yang Jianli. I'm a Chinese dissident. I was among the first group of Chinese who approached Tibetans more than 30 years ago and started the dialogue between the two peoples. And I have continued this effort to this day. And but over the years, I have found that the job has become increasingly difficult. The reason being, those who are willing and dare to approach and expose themselves to the Tibetan issue are distant. But we all know the influence of the distant living overseas have a very limited influence back in China because the information control and everything else, everybody understand why. So I just want to ask Mr. President Pampa Tsarinla, do you have any strategies to have a breakthrough to approach the Chinese? His Holiness Dalai Lama has long supported reaching out to the Chinese, which I think is very wise. It's the key, one of the keys to the resolution of the Tibetan issue. So now, as far as I can see, is the Tibetans only reach a few dissidents, which have very limited influence back in China. So do you have any strategies that you can have a breakthrough in this regard? Thank you.
With the Chinese government or the Chinese people? Or the
Chinese people.
dissidents? Yeah.
Dissidents.
Now we all know, I have been saying this, that you have this Indian epic Ramayana. Okay, let me do away with that. It's okay. We have always said, yeah, when I go back to Ramayana, it reminds me of this Lakshman and Ram. Okay, I'll go back to my old thing. I have always said, since this world came into being, Tibetans, Indians, Chinese, we're all neighbors. So even if you want, you can't pick Tibet out of that place and put it somewhere in the Pacific or the Atlantic or any other place. So we are neighbors, and we will remain neighbors. So as neighbors, we have to learn to live in peace. And we are not against Chinese people. The Chinese people, majority of the Chinese people also suffer as much as we do. Maybe some more or maybe some less as the Tibetan or the Uyghur people or the Mongolian people or the Hong Kong people. So His Holiness was very wise to have this policy to reach out to the Chinese people as much as possible. So in the many years, Yang Jieling himself has been leading this coalition of Chinese and Tibetans and Uyghurs and Taiwanese and Hong Kongers and sometimes even Macau people and sometimes even Christian minorities in China. So those moves have been very useful in creating better understanding between the communities that faces the same kind of repression from the same government. And within the Chinese dissidents also, there is a lot of disunity. And wherever I went, even as a Speaker of the Parliament in Australia, some Chinese meet in the morning of 4th June, and sometimes some Chinese meet in the afternoon. It's one Chinese group, but they meet at different times because they don't agree with each other. And there were requests for the Chinese dissidents to be addressed by His Holiness. And His Holiness also told them, you all come together, then I'll speak to you. Mm-hmm. And right now, they are also not together. And that's what I told our Hong Kong friends also, who are very young, educated, dynamic. And I told them that you should not go the Chinese dissidents way. They have to be united. Now they have started a democratic council. So if they can set up a democratic organization of the Hong Kongers to carry forward that movement, because when you deal with China, you will have to look at both the short term and the long term. And there are many things that they may be able to learn from the Tibetan experience of democratic practices. We will be very happy to assist them in whatever we can. And the Chinese dissidents also, we are reaching out. It's not just the Chinese dissident, but inside China, of course, we don't have access. But through you also, through your efforts also, the Tibetan issue is made known to other Chinese. So we have to renew our efforts. You should also work towards getting your people together. And we will be working towards finding common grounds to face common challenges. Even though our issues are a little different, Hong Kong issue is a little different, Tibetan issue is different, Uyghur issue is also different, Chinese dissidents issues are different, but we face the same opposition. So there must be ways how we can pool in our energies together, cooperate, not on all issues, but on certain issues, on certain occasions that should be, in a way, contribute towards making China accountable.
Right. All right. Do we have other questions?
Sikyong, my name is Ivan Mawarire. I am a democracy activist from Zimbabwe, where I spent many years in prison after challenging the dictatorship of Robert Mugabe. Since then, I've moved to the US, and this year I have the honor of being a National Endowment for Democracy fellow. I've also assumed a position with an organization called the Renew Democracy Initiative, founded by Garry Kasparov, along with many US politicians from both sides of the aisle, in an effort to help renew American democracy and global democracy. In fact, I have a request with your office at the moment to interview you in a podcast to talk to American audiences about the importance of fighting for democracy, as you are doing. I hope that that will be granted. My question, Sikyong, is about your hope for democracy. You rightly said earlier on, talking about Ukraine and how that reminds you of the invasion of Tibet in the 1950s. The decline for democracy has never been more evident than it is today with what is happening in Ukraine. I want to ask about what gives you hope for democracy in Tibet, or at least the freedom of Tibet, when globally we are in a deficit when it comes to the existing democracies. What do you see that gives you that resilience or that hope to continue to fight, to continue to be present, and to continue to rally Tibetans and friends of Tibet to fight for democracy in Tibet? Thank you, sir.
Now, inside Tibet, there is no space for democracy. So that is why His Holiness introduced democracy in exile, and we have this experience over the last 50 years, 50, 60 years. It's not as if we did not face obstacles along the way. Even now, we keep meeting the challenges as late as last year. And there is no other alternative to democracy right now. There's no better way or a better system than democracy, with all its faults and insufficiencies. But that is the best way forward right now. If there is another system that is better than democracy, then we can go forward. But that is definitely many, many times better than dictatorship. So the only way to evaluate that is to see how many people are happy in a dictatorship setup, or how many people are more happy in a democratic setup. But then democracies also face challenges, because you're talking about rules, laws, interpretations of laws, divisions of labor, and check and balance. So for democracy to succeed, I think there should be a very good understanding of the basic norms of democracy, the balance of power, check and balance of power, and accountability and transparency, and responsibility to the people. So democracy should not be taken for granted. And some people, even while they say they practice democracy, understand only the rights, not the responsibilities. So in democracy, we all should understand that rights and responsibilities go hand in hand. Even now, within the Tibetan diaspora community, within our democratic setup also, we have challenges. That is why I had to specify a lot on, or speak a lot within the parliament about the roles and responsibilities of the three pillars of democracy and the autonomous bodies, their roles and responsibilities, why we should not transgress our roles. When we transgress our roles, then problems comes in. And then laws should not be interpreted in its very narrow sense. Laws should be interpreted in the overall sense of the Constitution or the Charter in our case. And we also have this narrow-mindedness in interpreting laws in the manner that's beneficial to you, to oneself. So when those things happen, then crisis happens. Therefore, it's before, even while you practice democracy, it's very essential that you have to keep re-looking at things and see where problems might arise, what challenges might come up. We also have faced the same challenges, and I'm committed to steering democracy to a level that we would like democracy to be seen within the Tibetan community. There are a lot of challenges, but it's challenges worth taking on.
Great. Sir.
Hi, I'm Giovanni Vasello. I'm with the Bay Area Friends of Tibet. I want to, first of all, thank the National Endowment for Democracy for hosting this conversation, and welcome again Sikyong Pimpatseringla to Washington, D.C. in America as the democratically elected president of the Tibetan people in exile. My question, well, first of all, I want to say that thank you very much for bringing up the issues of Friends of Tibet and working with the Tibetan people, and applaud your vision to make something more happen in this regard so that we can increase and enlarge the circle of friends of Tibet. A couple weeks ago here in DC, there was a conference of Tibetans discussing the future of Tibet, as you may know. And one of the things that struck me at that conference was how the Tibetans themselves identified themselves as being the children of Chenrezig, being the children of the Buddha of love and compassion. So as being a culture, Tibet, being a culture of such deep compassion and such deep love, as exemplified by the Dalai Lama and Panchen Lamas, what is compassion's role in championing democracy? How do you see compassion as a strength? And how is America practicing compassion in its democracy or not? And how is Tibetans doing it? And how can we, what is the role of championing compassion in a democracy? Thank you.
Compassion, in other words, is also better understanding. If you better understand other people, then you have more compassion. So last time it blurted out of my mouth of a conversation that I had with one of my friends when that person told me that the members in the house were very brutal in their attack, and how do you keep your calm? So I said, in US, you pay money to go to retreat centers. And for me, the parliament session is a retreat. Because you have to concentrate to listen to all the questions and note, and perhaps the last session in our parliament must have had the largest number of questions. So you have to concentrate to write the questions, also think about the answers while writing that, And when you concentrate, that is meditation. Meditation is nothing else but concentration. So then when people speak harshly at you, then you speak back in a soft tone. That is practicing compassion. And then when people ask you questions, if you are good in psychology, then you understand that, okay, this person is asking this question ignorant of this basic fact or that thing. And then when that person is asking a question, then we know that, okay, he has been instigated by somebody else to do that. Then you feel that, okay, he doesn't know that much, so you feel more compassionate for that person. So compassion in everyday life. It's not a matter of whether you're wearing a robe or not, or whether you're spiritual or not. It's not necessarily only a Buddhist concept. Every religion, every spiritual thought has compassion as in its element. And it's a matter of how you apply when you do your job. And that's very much possible.
Great. Let me ask one last question before we break for a reception. You haven't talked at all about India, and I'm just curious if you can say a word about how confident you are in the Indian support, sort of societal, but also the governmental support for the Tibetan communities that's found refuge in India with the settlements and the headquarters of your government in Dharamsala. Are you confident in the steadfastness of that support? Are you worried that the political trajectory in India will compromise it? Just give us a sense of how you're engaging with India, both on a foreign policy level. How are you getting them to sort of in line with your foreign policy, but also at the same time, how are you engaging with them to ensure the continuity of support for the Tibetan community?
I want to underscore the fact that if not for India, we don't exist in the way we exist today. So Indian support for us has been tremendous. We will never be able to repay India for what India did to us at the most critical period of our history, even now, continue to do so. The relationship that we have with the Indian government is very, from my perspective, and during my tenure, I always assure the Indian government that it will be very transparent and that we will have a very a relationship that is, of course, more beneficial for the Tibetans. There's not much that the Indians can gain from the presence of His Holiness, but then from the Tibetans. But then also, we talk about things like, we lost our country, but the world gained the Dalai Lama. So we try to look at the positive sides of that. In that respect, His Holiness being in India and calling himself as a son of India is something that the Tibetans contribute to them. And His Holiness has become the symbol of ancient Indian wisdom. So that is the only way and that we are able to repay back in the form of wisdom of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And we tell our Indian friends also, I may look Tibetan, but our mind is Indian, because our language came from India, our religion came from India, and I myself, many of us of our generation were born in India, so that's also our birthplace. So we enjoy a very close relationship. Some countries ask us as to, what do you think we should advise Indian government to do to the Tibetans? I said, we do have a very good relationship with the Indian government. You maintain your relationship with India. We will maintain our relationship with India. And I think despite all the frictions in the border or the tumultuous dynamism that is happening all over the world, India will stand with the Tibetans. On political issue, His Holiness used to say that India, whenever it comes to China, India is overcautious. So today I can say maybe the over is gone, but India is still cautious. But we work with them very closely and in a transparent manner, and we will remain forever grateful to the successive governments of India and people of India. We are located in 10 different states and 2 union territories in India. our settlements were established by the Indian government that facilitated us to retain our identity with our schools, the monastic institutions, the civil society, all those institutions that helped retain our identity, even in the exile community. That's only because of India. And right now, we face the challenge of the Tibetan community getting dispersed. So now we have to work more at getting the compact communities well working together. That's also one of our challenge. And without the help and support of Indian government, we will not be where we are today. And we are really thankful to them. And we have no apprehensions about what Indian government might do to us adversely, not at all. We believe that Indian government will stand with us all through. Thank you so much.
All right, we have a request, Young Jin Lee. Is it a quick question? Quick question. Super quick. Wait for the microphone.
Mr. Sikyong, how do you see the chance of resuming talks with China during your tenure?
Quick. I really hope I can be clairvoyant about this, but I am not a soothsayer. So I can only say that till March, there do not seem to be much chance, and then we'll may have a better chance after March. Get hold of the opportunities as it comes.
All right. With that, let me thank you and welcome you once again back to, I know Washington is an old home for you, but it's really an honor to have you back as the president of the Tibetan community. Please join us. We're having a reception here. The weather didn't cooperate, so it looks like we've set up inside. But we hope you all can stick around and have a drink and have a chance to talk to Pempala and the rest of the Tibetan delegation. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much.